think we're live.
Hello.
Hello all.
So everybody, aside from the fact that Mark is well and truly fed, he has had a substantial meal. I have had a sandwich.
And I have my tea.
We are live. And who cares about what we've eaten this week or today? But yeah, I know. I suppose the question we're asking this evening or late this afternoon is, and I think we have to be really, really clear. This is not about blame. It's about responsibility, awareness, and progress. And I think, and Mark, you've drawn on this before in conversations we've had. I think we don't realise that we can step into this protector role quite easily without actually fully acknowledging what we're doing and how we're disempowering another person. It doesn't necessarily have to be a man and a woman. Actually, a woman can equally do this to another woman by stepping in and sort of effectively taking over. I suppose that's the conversation tonight, is how do we change that narrative? How do we stop being protectors, not just men as protectors of women, because that's, you know, an outdated narrative, but also, actually, to be fair, women can be protectors of other women. So I'm going to throw it to you guys. Open-ended question. Answers on a postcard. But yeah, I suppose that's the thing, isn't it?
It's a big question, Laura. Like, I was standing there with my youngest daughter, making the dinner, and I said, I have to go. I have a meeting at 6:30. And she said, what's your meeting about? I said, well, we're here to talk about men as allies in women's safety in the world. And she goes, well, why would you be talking about that? What do you know about that? I went, no, well, like, I have to talk from the men's perspective. Yeah, but what do you know? You don't know anything. I was like, okay, right. So I hope you're speaking about this and not in general, right? But she had a point, and she has a point, right? What do I know? She said, surely it's women. Now, she's only 12. Surely it's women who should be speaking and not men. And she has a point there. So when you ask the question, how do we stop being protectors? Because even my attitude in the conversation was, I wasn't going to get into the conversation with her because I was going to protect her from the conversation. I wasn't going to get into it. I wasn't going to go down that route because I didn't think she would be capable of it. But no doubt she's capable of it. No doubt she's capable of that conversation. And maybe it was me, again, I protected her from the conversation instead of going, okay, well, this is the reality. And I think maybe that's the key word, Laura, is what is the reality? Because we don't see the reality. And like, geez, I was only walking back up the road with my wife the other day, like, and she said to me, and I will argue this thing with her like an idiot, like the man you're trying to speak to in this, right? She was saying to me, she would never walk close to an entrance to a house. I said, why? It's because if somebody grabbed you, that's what they pull you into. I was like, yeah, but we live here, like, she goes, that doesn't matter. And I was trying to have a discussion about it. We're probably trying to argue the point, right? But I was saying, oh, you should feel safe. That's what it was more or less saying to her. You should feel safe. But without accepting the reality that she doesn't. And so that's the thing, right? So if we want to step away from the protector role, maybe we need to accept the reality that isn't our reality, that the reality that is female reality, or whatever other reality, the reality of the person we're trying to protect in this space. And I think that's the challenge for us, because there's the education is in that as well. So as much as I know the last day we talked a lot about the education of men and in our culture and masculinity, I think there's an education for us about what's actually happening outside of this blinker vision.
I think you're right, Mark. And there's something going through my head right now that's sort of saying, is that, because I think there's also something here about, is that a protection because this is somebody who you absolutely wholeheartedly love with every ounce of your being, versus a protection because it is a woman. So I think that there is a narrative there as to delineate between, because it's your wife versus, you know, another woman per se. And I might be wrong for saying that, but that's something that comes up in my mind. But I think you're right. I think there's a natural instinct in us all to want to protect another person, to make sure they're not going to come to harm. It's just a question as to whether that's almost, is that right to do that? I don't know. Maybe I've kind of oversimplified it. I don't know. What do you think, Dan?
And because it isn't simple, or is it? That's the thing. And life is full of nuance and grey areas. What's clear, right? I'm going to make an incredibly general statement here, and I apologise for that. But men have an innate drive to protect. We as humans, right here in the modern world right now, we have Paleolithic emotions and nervous system. We are still wired to live as hunter-gatherers. Modern human life has been in a blink of an eye. So for millennia, men protected. Whether even if, you go back tens of thousands of years when we might not have been in the patriarchal world, which we have existed in recent times, men still, because they had the physicality, because they were able to compartmentalize their emotions and fight. This is huge generalization, but we are wired to protect. So now the world is different. Now we have to use our self-awareness and our consciousness to overcome our wiring. The same wiring that makes us think there's bears and cats around every corner and therefore we're all stressed and anxious, right? So we've got to be aware of it. We've got to watch this stuff come up in us. And this is what I make an attempt to do these days. When I want to step in and fight an argument on behalf of my wife, which is what happens. Somebody, tries to bully my wife or is rude to her or anything like that. My instinct is to step in. That's what I want to do. My drive says protect. I don't need to. Julie's quite capable of fighting her own battles. And actually, she's much more fierce than me in a lot of ways. So she doesn't need me to fight a battle. She absolutely doesn't. So I have to be very aware of that feeling. I have to step back from it. I have to understand where it comes from. This is an innate drive within me that wants to do this, but I don't need it. They don't need it. We don't need it. And if we can all do that, then we can all start to flip this narrative on its head. And because Julie always says to me when, we've had many discussions about this sort of thing and violence against women and girls and violence in general and violent men. And I would often say to her, look, we just want to protect you. And she'd say, protect us from what? And that would always make me think, yeah.
It's so interesting. And it's a really good point. And I guess, protect us from what? And I guess, my brain's gone in, full curly welly mode. Because but I still go back to, is it a protection because this is what men feel they need to step into as a role, as a husband, as a partner? Is this just what society says, and that's the right thing to do? Is there part of it as ego driven, where I'm good if I do these things? I guess I suppose my brain is like gone into this place of, what do we need protecting on? There is a part of me that says us as partners, true partners, men and women together can be very much stronger together. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I'm in the position as, you know, a widow where, you know, my husband died some years ago. But actually, to be fair, he probably would have stepped very much into the I'm protecting her. And in fairness, I think part of the reason he didn't tell me as much as he did, or should have told me more about the situation he was in, dying of cancer, was in protection of me, because he didn't think I could handle it. In fact, actually, just even that element made it harder for me to navigate, because he didn't share all of it. And so there's part of me that says, in our wish to shield people, and I think this isn't just men shielding women, I think this is just generally people wanting to shield people from the hurt and etc. of the world. Actually, we do more damage than we do good, although our intentions are from a place of good. Is that, would that kind of resonate with, you know, kind of what men are trying to achieve?
What does it say, though, about our attitude towards women, where we are protecting because we don't think you can handle something? You know, like, fine if it's right. So it's a bear. Okay, I'll take on the bear because I'm probably better suited to it if I have a weapon of some sort, right? But, you know, like, if it's information, yeah, if it's information, like you're better minding the kids, you run, you keep them alive. Okay, I'll see you on the other side, right? But if it's information, then, you know, what right in that case do we have to protect somebody from that information? Now, I completely understand that there can be information in situations where maybe somebody isn't ready for that. Maybe it's quite difficult, but to completely hold it back from them, what is it saying about your attitude towards that person? And if you're talking, and particularly about it being a partnership and being at equal level, then how does that work? Like, I find it quite interesting when you see a much older couple, and let's say one partner passes away and they're maybe in their 80s, or, you know, they're quite old, and they've become so symbiotic in how they live that the other person is absolutely at a loss for how things can work without them. And in a way, both of them are protecting each other from the world in their own way, from the stuff that doesn't work for them, and that's fine, because that's a safety and an agreement. It's an early unwritten agreement. But information like that, I just would wonder, not to question on obviously on your husband, but I know we've all been in those kind of situations. Like, you know, like I said to my daughter earlier on, no, like I didn't bring the conversation up, or I didn't go into that level because I thought, oh, you're not ready for this piece of information. But maybe I wasn't ready to have a conversation that I would have found challenging, is another side of it. And so who are we protecting in that?
You're absolutely right, Mark, in that, are we ready to have that conversation? It is something I have wrestled with ever since. And hence, for me, communication has become, you know, one of my biggest values, open and honest conversation, because I felt exactly to that point that I didn't think it was a sort of a close off, because I didn't think he was ready to have that conversation in a time. I mean, I understand why, don't you know, with the benefit of hindsight. But I think you're right. I think it is challenging to have some of these conversations, and in a world that is so busy doing stuff, getting on to the next thing, those conversations get missed, I guess, because we're too busy. Dan, you're nodding.
Yeah, but the challenging conversations are the ones we need to have, right? The ones we're all frightened of and we're all scared of and we think we're protecting people from, they're the conversations we need to have. You know, I've seen people who have kept things from their children and it is blown up in their face. You know, told them about things about their background, whether they've been adopted, things like that. They've kept it from them until their adolescence or something like that, and it blows up in their face. oh, I thought I was protecting them from it. But protecting them from the truth? Who are you to decide that you get to protect somebody from the truth? And it's the same with when my wife says to me, protect us from what? She's saying to me, who are you to decide what I need protecting from? And what I mean violent men, right? But I need protecting from violent men just as much as anybody else.
It's very interesting with the definition of a woman that went through the UK courts recently, and you know the anti-trans agenda. That's a touch point for people, and it's a very easy touch point for people. But one of the things that we're not going into that, but one of the things that I found most interesting about it was a lot of commentary and posts I've seen on like Instagram and those kind of places from women saying that it's never been a trans woman that's made me feel unsafe. It's always been a man that's made me feel unsafe. You know, and like, so the narrative, like, it's very interesting that the narrative in popular media is that we need to protect you from trans women, right? You know, it's not we need to protect you from men, which is probably more of the reality, but that's easy to touch on an emotional point for a lot of people. Then it's a lot easier to say that that's a danger than it is to admit that it's men that are the danger. Because that's
something different, isn't it? That's something other that we can point the finger at. So that makes it nice and easy, rather than all of us taking responsibility and saying, we just got to stop making violence acceptable. We've got to set up our justice system so it is not acceptable. We've got to concentrate and frame these things in terms of perpetrators, not victims, not framing it as violence against somebody. This is violence committed by somebody. This is the conversation we've got to have. This is the tough conversation we're not having and we're avoiding and we're protecting people from. But this is the reality, right? We are creating violent people. We are creating violent men. How is that happening? Why is that happening? What can we do to stop it? These are the conversations we've got to be having, not just how can we keep people safe, not just lock your doors and avoid crime. It's like, why is this happening? Systematically, are we creating people like this? Why is it happening? Why is it getting worse in some areas? What can we do about it? How can we all together, because we don't want this world, do we? We don't want to have to be protecting anybody from violent people. But here we are in this world where we're creating violent people, and it comes from dysfunction and all sorts of disorders and cultural reasons. But we don't talk about this stuff. This isn't we're now busy being distracted by this daft thing that's just gone through the courts, and now we're picking on a minority as we always seem to do, instead of actually dealing with the real issue here.
Well, it's very interesting, Donny, like that you're saying that, because I listened to a podcast there during the week, and after 10 minutes, I thought, I do not have a single opinion in conjunction with this guy. And this guy is annoying the hell out of me. I said, but I'm going to listen to the rest of this because I need to hear the other side of this kind of thinking. And his opinion was very much about it's my job to protect women. And his opinion was, I don't have time for men who are woke, you know, and this was his strong opinion. And what I found really striking, and if it goes to towards the Andrew Tate and these kind of people in the world, was he was talking about men need to be strong. That was his narrative, that men need to be strong and they have to be strong and anyone can get up and do anything they want to do. You know, you have no excuses. Now, some of his stuff was positive in terms of take responsibility and take control of your life, right? And that was good. But a lot of his stuff was very archaic, very the mentality, the America of the 50s, if you will, and that's me telling you what kind of person he was voting for in the election, right? So, but that was such a way of thinking, and he has a huge following. And it struck me that in listening to him, I was going, "Oh, that resonates. There's a bit of value in what you're saying there, right?" But the value then was tied into all these other pieces about men being dominant and men being strong,
and that's where the problem comes, Mark. Yeah. Isn't it? It's like dominance is strength. No, it is not. Dominance is weakness. It's insecurity. If you've got to try and dominate someone, that's because you're weak. That's not strength. Yes, we do need strong men. Strong men with strong minds don't try and dominate people.
Mhm.
Carla's made a great point here. We make decisions to protect others with good intentions at the time, which may forever haunt those we were intending to protect. And I think this is absolutely echoing what you're both saying, because, you know, the intention is one thing, but actually what it actually does is something quite different. I mean, I find it extremely interesting because, you know, obviously I'm sitting the other side of the table, clearly. But I still sit there going, there is part of me as a human, irrespective of gender, whatever gender I am, that I care and that I want to, you know, some might say protect someone from harm. And so how do we know what is just a genuine protection? And I don't, you know, look, this is a hard question. How do I know that this is me because it's a genuine care, because actually there is the lion coming up or there is the bear coming up? And at what point is it because it's my ego stepping in, and me as a man, and actually equally as a woman, potentially stepping into a space of ego because I have to protect you, because that's the thing I have to do. And I think that's the subtle difference.
Yeah.
How do we know the difference?
We have narcissists and psychopaths walking among us. This is the sad truth of our culture and our society. There are people that cannot help defend themselves, who will be taken advantage of by narcissists and psychopaths. We do have to protect those people. We have a duty and a responsibility to do that. But where's the line? Who decides who needs the protecting? Who decides when you step in? It's difficult, isn't it? And you've got to trust your instincts and trust your intuition, not get all up in your head about it, and understand when you can see somebody here is being taken advantage of. And I have an ability here to step in and stop it happening. I can do something about that. And we should. And we need to be careful about how we do that, and whether it's confrontational and, you know, all those things. We've got to keep everybody in the situation as safe as possible. But if you see that happening, you've absolutely, and that's nothing to do with ego. That's your duty as a human being to spot that and see it, because there are some very damaged human beings who will take advantage of vulnerable people, and vulnerable people do need some protection. But we've got to be careful of that, then not slipping into patronizing, you know, disabled people and things like that, which I've walked into that situation many a time. I remember working for Breakfast Telly once, and one of the reporters was blind, and I said to him on the phone, "Oh, Gary, you're coming into the studio. Do I need to do a risk assessment?" And the phone line just went completely silent. And I sat there, and he just left it with me. He thought, I'm not gonna say anything. And I sat there and I thought, oh dear Lord, what have I done? What have I said here? Of course he didn't need a risk assessment. He'd been in and out of the studio a million times. He was quite capable of getting himself about. And that was a ridiculous assumption on my part. So you've got to be really careful and aware of your own prejudices and your own perspective and your own point of view. But yet there are absolutely times where vulnerable people need our protection.
So is that the starting point to easy awareness is the starting point to realize what we're saying and how that might land? Where does it all start, where we can start changing this narrative over men as protectors?
Well, maybe as I was talking about, walking down the street with my wife, and she's telling me that she doesn't feel safe, and I'm telling her that she should. So maybe the starting point is I don't I listen to her sentence and don't say mine, because why should anyone feel the way I tell them they should feel? That's it's beyond arrogance to even do that, and so maybe that is the starting point, is to listen and to actually go, well, what why is it you don't feel safe? What is it that you don't feel safe about things? Like, even when you were talking there, Dan, about like in culture how men are these days, like I'm reminded of a story in the news in Ireland about 2 years ago, where a guy who was in the army, he beat up someone who was gay, and then some woman came in to stop the fight, and he punched her as well. And it went to court, and the judge decided not to give him a sentence, not to convict him, because he didn't want to damage his potential excellent army career. So obviously social media took hold of that, and the Department of Public Prosecution appealed the judge's sentence, and your man was given a criminal conviction in the end. But if your person sitting on the bench and your judge, who you have to deem to be impartial and of a standard, was able to see it like that. So no one was listening to the stories at that point. Nobody was listening to the stories, and he was obviously hurt people, so I'd say there's some part of that was going on there. But if he gets community service, this community service should be to listen to the stories, to go to the shelters, to hear what people have to say. And that will help. Maybe if you can change one mind, you can begin to change more from the example of the mind that's changed.
And that says to me, sorry, Laura, to jump in, but that judge making that decision, and again, touches on what I said earlier, that's an acceptance of violence. That's just saying that that happened, it lost his temper or whatever, and it was a situation, but we can't ruin his career. That's an acceptance of violence. That has got to stop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I even bring it to listen to a podcast on a football match at the weekend, a local Gaelic football match here, right? And one of the guys at the end went and celebrated in front of the other bench. So a fella came out and hit him a box, punched him, and then there was a big melee because one guy punched him. And one of the analysts said something very interesting afterwards. He said, what he did deserved a box, but not that he should have got one. I thought, okay, that's interesting. But, is it interesting for the behavior to be called out rather than to be acted upon? And it's back to that concept of responding or reacting in the situation.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's are we responding or reacting, and where is that motivation coming from? And I think that is true, whether it is a man to a woman to a woman. And Carl has said here, active listening allows us to hear what's not being said, and I couldn't agree more with that. I think so often we choose to fill in the spaces with what we assume, and I think this is very much the conversation we're having, rather than actually what's really being said from the voice that's trying to say it. And in this case, it is the woman's voice, who invariably can be so often quietened, silenced, not heard at all, but assumed that it is requiring A, B, and C. So what do we do? What do we need to do differently that's going to change that status quo?
I mean, Carl's point is spot on. This is what we need. We need proper listening. Not listening to respond, listening to understand. And that's what it's about. It's about understanding. It's about compassion. It's about empathy. It's about walking in the shoes of other people. It's not making assumptions that you know what's going on. It's not assuming that because men are physically bigger and stronger, they have a role to play, right? It's not creating a narrative and a story around that. It's not trotting out old narratives about what we believe strength and power to be, because it isn't dominance and control. It isn't. That's weakness. And if we want to be strong, it's together as allies is title today. That's what we've got to do. And that only comes from listening and understanding, not making assumptions, not making decisions for other people on other people's behalf, not trotting out old rubbish about strong men being dominant. This conversation has got to change, right? Strength comes from collaborating. Collaborating only happens if we listen. And this is what we've got to do. We've got to all come together and say we don't want to live in this world anymore. Right, we all agree on that. Last time we had this chat, we talked about the headline about the young lads who support Andrew Tate. 1 in 5. But hang on, 4 in 5 don't. Right. So there's 80% of us that don't want this stuff. Yeah. So why is it happening? Yeah. Why aren't the 80% of us all coming together, listening to each other, and going, "Oh yeah, we agree. Oh yeah, we agree. Oh, we're all on the same team here, aren't we?" And how powerful is it that if the 80% get together and say, we don't want to live in this world anymore. We're not going to accept violence anymore. We're not going to brush it under the carpet. We're not going to say boys will be boys. We're not going to allow people to dominate other people because they're vulnerable. We're not going to have that anymore. And if the 80% all come together and decide we don't want to have it, we can change it.
Absolutely. And I think the other part is, like you say, Mark, about impressing your ideals. So in the way that you say, why should my wife feel safe? That's me impressing my ideals and my interpretation of the world, etc., on her, and yet I'm not allowing her a voice. And I think that's the other part to what you're saying, Dan, is recognizing when we're doing that. No, Mark?
Isn't there instinct a funny thing in this, though? And like an instinct based on culture, like there's some people who will say, "Oh, don't want a man opening the door," and so we say, "Of course I do. What's wrong with that?" Right? It's a cultural thing, right? We're used to talking about the cave piece and Paleolithic brains. I would argue Jurassic sometimes, Dan, but I think. I remember, right, and maybe this is the instinct thing, right? And I've often told this story as a way to, is it defend myself or a way to excuse myself or a way to allow myself to be, right? I remember when we had babies in the house and I used to get the weekend newspaper delivered on a Friday night, Saturday morning, 3 or 4 in the morning. And the baby would be crying all night. I'd never even wake up, wouldn't even notice the baby was crying. But when that newspaper was put through the front letterbox, I'd sit up and go, what was that noise? What was that? At 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And I would argue that, I'm attuned to protect us from whatever's coming out the door, whereas your job inside the cave is to mind the small things that are in the cave, And I would argue that that's the instinct in us, right? But is that simplifying and excusing the responsibility in it by arguing for instinct over avoiding responsibility?
But we've got to acknowledge that is the case, Mark. We are wired like that. We absolutely are. So we have to, we have to acknowledge that. But that's no longer the world in which we live. So we have to have the awareness that as a partnership and as a household, we want to divvy up the role slightly differently. Then we can do that. But we can only do that with awareness and by understanding the other people within the household and what they want and what they need and having that conversation. But, we are wired that way. That is our biology. Men are listening for the danger at the door, whereas women are listening for the baby crying. But we can change that with our awareness because we live in a different world now. We don't have those roles anymore that we used to have. There is a certain amount of biology involved here, but we can overcome it. We can be aware of it. We can understand ourselves as much as understanding the people around us. But it's a conversation now, right? Isn't it? And I think for you to say, well, that's my wiring is okay. But that's it can't be used as a cop out for you not doing your fair share of getting up in the middle of the night and all the rest of it. It can't. That doesn't fly. But at the same time, you've got to understand that is how we're wired.
Mm-hmm. So maybe homework here for ourselves is that we need to start listening, asking the question. And go back to maybe that conversation I had with my wife when we were walking down the street. Like, I was going, like, this is a cul-de-sac. It's a really safe space. Like, you know, there's a big green here. There's no danger. She said, because you don't see or think there's danger, then that doesn't mean there's no danger. And she said that you know, and I said, but like, you know, if you tell the girls this, you're going to give them a fear of the world. She said, I have to give them a fear of the world because I have to keep them safe. And I haven't processed that as a thought, right? But isn't that an alarming thing? Because we don't have to. I don't have any sons, but we don't have to go out and give our son a fear of the world to keep him safe. We don't need to. There's no need to do that because, you know, he will probably be okay. Some things bad could happen. Yeah, he could get mixed in with the wrong crowd, etc. But it's not about. He doesn't have to fear 50% of the population. I guess that's as alarming as I could put it.
It's really, really interesting. And I guess, so there's two things that are going through my mind. One is, because I know, Dan, you do have a son, so I'm curious to understand that thought. But as somebody who obviously clearly is female and doesn't have any kids herself, as a woman, I still go to a place of protection. So I'm still back in a place of, is there a level that actually is because I do think there is part for me that goes, there is protection, and that's just as humans because we care. That's irrespective of gender. We just care because we don't want somebody to be harmed. And so there's part of me that's asking in my head, it's like, how do we delineate between, you know, what is because it is gender and thus it's a man overly protecting a woman, which I think is really where it comes down to, rather than seeing them as an equal. So that's the question that's going in my head, because, you know, I would want to ensure that my fellow females out there are protected and safe. And that's not coming from me because I'm male, that's coming as me as a human being wanting to ensure that my fellow human beings are
listened to each other, Laura, haven't we? You know?
Yeah.
And you know, like Mark was saying there, we look at Mark's wife's reaction to that as, and I look at it as a man and just say that's irrational. That's irrational. But how can I say that? Because I can't step into the shoes and understand the world from that point of view. But there have been times where when I used to have a social life, when I would be out and some girls at work or some girls in our friendship group would say to me, Dan, if I'm getting followed about by some creepy weirdo, can I come and pretend to be your girlfriend? And I would always say, yeah, of course, absolutely. Now, that's because they're asking me. I've not taken it upon myself to step in and do something about that. They've said that to me, and because that makes them feel safe. Even just knowing that they can turn to me and do that just makes them feel safe. And
so is that the difference then, Dan? It's what I'm hearing there is the difference is in that situation they have asked you. So it's the difference between asking and assumption. You know, in Mark's examples, he's assumed that his wife doesn't feel safe, so therefore he's going to step in to protect, rather than say, do you feel safe, which is asking her.
Yeah, or I think accepting the reality there. So what Mark was saying is he couldn't. In his head, he couldn't understand his wife's reality of I don't feel safe in their own cul-de-sac walking past the door. It's like we've got to accept that reality and go, right, it's not my reality. That's not how I feel, but I accept that's how you feel. Now, what can I do to make that better? Do you want us to walk this side of the street then, and so you feel safe? Cool, yeah, let's do that. Rather than, I think what Mark is saying, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, is that he needs to accept that as the reality and not just shut it down and say, you are safe. You know, hang on, look at the stats. What's the chances of something happening to you here on our feet? You know,
I actually said that. Look at the stats. What's the
and
chances?
that's exactly how I would have reacted, Mark. Well, what we must do is accept that reality. It's not ours, it's not our perspective, but actually then when we do, then we can understand. If we shut it down and we apply logic and reason like Mark did there, and we would do that, and I would do that, then you've lost the conversation, you've lost the opportunity to go, oh, okay, so what can I do here to make you feel safer?
It's really, really interesting because what's going through my mind at the moment is it's just the way, you know, somebody would probably say, you know, the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of scenario, where, you know, women feel the situation rather than men go in with the logic and the practical application. But I think what I'm gathering from here is like, actually, it's not the assumption, it is a case of asking and discovering, remaining curious to how the other person experiences the world. And therefore, in that curiosity, you will discover something different than perhaps the assumption that you might have made prior to that. Would that be fair?
I think it's necessary, as well as fair. Like that's the education part. That's the branching out our perception of reality to include larger realities. You know, if it becomes an inclusion thing, and this is something that I've never forgotten since I first heard it. It was a lady called Michaela, I can't think of her surname, who gave a TEDx talk the same day I was giving the talk. And she was in a wheelchair, and her talk was about accessibility. She'd been in a wheelchair since she was born. She was born with some condition when she was younger. And ironically, she couldn't do her talk from the stage because the hall, despite only being 10 years old, wasn't actually wheelchair accessible from the stage, which really made her point about accessibility. But her main point, and this is so true for what it is to be accessible, was her sister was born with the same condition, and there was one cinema in the north of Ireland that had wheelchair accessible doors when they were growing up, and they went to it one day, and she was like, "Isn't this great? We can finally go to the cinema, you know, because there's a door accessible for wheelchairs." And this girl, Michaela, was also born with no actual ears, and she said, "That's fantastic. Where's the door for people with no ears?" And it just struck me from how, like, accessibility does not mean that it's accessible to people in wheelchairs. Accessibility means it's accessible. It's accessible to every single person with 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, nose, neurotypical, neurodiverse, whatever they are. It's accessible to everybody. So every door should be a wheelchair accessible door, every single door. So therefore, everybody can use it without prejudice. And that's the point of it. Like, our reality is only my reality confined to this. So it has to branch out to include all the other realities that exist within our space, that I don't tell them, you should have my reality. You should have this way of feeling about it. And I think that's our job, is to assimilate all these other ways, because once we can understand and assimilate that, then we can act, you know, and then we can, to your point about, do we have to protect? Then we can protect in the right way because we know what we're protecting, or we partner because we know we can partner.
I think that's such a powerful point, because it is that thing is how do we invite inclusivity where there's no assumption, but we seek to understand rather than anything else, you know. But I am very conscious that, wow, we are almost 45 minutes. So I don't know. I'm sure there is a closing thought that you both want to share.
So for me, it's awareness, Laura, right? It's self-awareness. There is no greater skill we can have than self-awareness. Understand what you're bringing to the table. Understand your perspective. Then when you do, you can, like Mark did when he had that conversation with his wife, you can spot where you're coming from and go, hang on a minute. How am I coloring this situation with my perspective, with my beliefs, with my prejudices? What's really going on here? Like Carl said, active listening. You get to hear the bit between the lines that you don't hear if you're just waiting to respond or waiting to put your opinion in or going to try and dominate the conversation. Self-awareness is where it starts, and then awareness of the other people and the world around you.
I love that.
Yeah, that's really important. And I suppose I will, because that's the piece of speaking about reality. And I will add to that, like in terms of, so there's the self-awareness, and we need to be at a level of self-awareness to accept where we're wrong, to maybe step into that vulnerability bit, a little bit of piece, because I think
willing to be wrong, Mark, isn't it? That's the
thing. Because I think we struggle with it. I know I do. Like I try, and I give talks on vulnerability. And I was given a talk once. I was asked to do a talk on vulnerability, and they cancelled the day before and said, "Can we do it 2 weeks later?" And I was delighted because it was rubbish. Because I gave this beautiful talk about vulnerability, and in no part of the talk was I vulnerable. So what was the point? Where was the value in that, to not show vulnerability in a talk on vulnerability? And I think that's what we need to step into a little bit more. And for us men, maybe that's one of the hardest things we can do, because even though sometimes we can become aware of stuff, we still run from it because we still have the defense mechanisms to do that. And you know, maybe we need to feel some of the pain that the women have always felt in order to allow them to feel safe.
And that's strength. That's what strong means to me, is being able to be vulnerable in that way. Is being able to accept and understand somebody else's reality and somebody else's pain. That's strength, not domination, not control, not being overbearing and using your physicality to get your way. That is not strength. Strength is the ability to be wrong and hold your hands up and say you're wrong, to take responsibility for yourself, to be vulnerable and to accept the reality of other people. That's strength.
Yeah.
As ever, fabulous to have you both in conversation. Until next month, folks, have a wonderful evening.